afraid you have to bear with my bad voice, and hopefully I shouldn't really speak, but I didn't want to miss this opportunity. I'm going to just talk about towers, and I'm going to talk about the towers we did in the last close to 40 years. I mean, there's something about towers which has always fascinated mankind. They represent power, strength, and wealth. Their tall monuments were built to celebrate victories, memorialize individuals, and to signal goals and achievements and aspirations of people and corporations. Many of the best of them have no actual real uses, like the Washington Monument and the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Looking back at many towers built and under construction, we believe that bigger is not always better, and the strongest and most lasting designs show the integration of architectural and structural intentions and necessities. As a matter of fact, an effective structure with less weight, less material, and their recyclability can be a super tall tower's most sustainable and often overlooked feature. Interesting also, the change in scale, the way those towers reflect the spirit of the places, the time around the globe, and the futuristic thinking of the practices they realize them. What sometimes gets lost in looking at towers and making the height, and even with the discussion about what is the height, is that I think, and it's been mentioned before, that we've kind of lost fun what towers can actually do to cities. Towers become monuments. They replace civic and religious monuments. They become the identity of a city, a region, or a country. And in reviewing our work, there are periods and there were places where we actually just did that. And there are other places where we concentrated more on the technical and the functional aspects. And I think it's that mix which creates which creates that magic, towers can actually convey. I mean, I'm showing those buildings in a reverse order. This is the last building we finished. It's actually it's a built one, our tallest one, about 330 meters in Guangzhou. It's a very, very simple building. And it's a square. It has a diagonal structure which is reinforced the day and night by the treatment of the facade and the lighting. And the lobby reflects the connection to the ground, and a big open space becomes the sign and the signal, all very integrated and very coherent. The feature of this building is the facade, which is a shingled facade with overlapping fritted pieces of glass, which actually, as the sun moves around the building, shade the building in a very efficient way, and using a part of the building to do more than one thing. It's in the enclosure. This building is just about getting finished in Tokyo, where we again used the treatment of the facade, the north facade, folded facade, the other facades, with an integral shading system, which shades this east, south, and the west side of the building. Building is built above, it's for the Japan Post, above the original Japan Post building in Tokyo, which became a landmark and couldn't be touched. And it's in the Maruyoshi district, which has all 200-meter buildings, huge floor plates, 45,000 square feet. So the structure is less a problem than to activate the building with a facade which responds to the different conditions. So we're taking then a leap in the future. These buildings are in the advanced state of design. This one is under construction. It's in Nanjing, 400-meter tower, mixed use, glass building with again features which allow natural ventilation. In the big shopping center, which is shaded. It's a glass building with a system which provides a varying experience during the day and the night, and with the orientation of those pyramids and the openings on these pyramids and the lighting at night, it becomes like a place of an event. It's on the outside of the city, and I thought of it like an entertainment place, like a stadium, and there's a park on the upper level. This is in Nanjing too. It's a downtown, 3-tower scheme. There was a common theme found with shaping the building and orienting the buildings with a straight back. The taller ones have a diagonal bracing system. The facade has steel plates, which again create in addition to holding the glass, creating a shading effect through the depth of about 20 centimeters. And this one is in Shanghai, finishing design development. And for the stock exchange, the future exchange, the clearing corporation, all financial institutions, which need very varying types of spaces. And you see on the diagram that the building allows huge footprints up to 45,000 square meter, and towards the top of the building, there are actually 2 buildings. And through the atriums, the various functional accommodations can be achieved, and the biggest building is 75 by 75 meters, 220 meters tall. So they're not tall in that sense we talk about, but they required a very close integration of the structure, the facade, the mechanical system, and the bridge, which contains a museum, is connecting them, and they create a unity, but also a certain identity, different identity for these institutions. Closer to home, the last tower we finished in America was in Las Vegas, the Veer Towers. And they obviously inspired by, with their leaning character, their apartment buildings, the treatment of the facades, doing something which one should only do in Las Vegas. Again, multiple thoughts in terms of the facade, the yellow fritting, which is actually very transparent, for the bedrooms and the kitchen and the secondary rooms, the clear on the living areas, the horizontal system of shades, which is very effective in Las Vegas because the sun is very high in summer and it's very hot, and in winter it's very cool there and the sun is low and the sun gets to the inside of the buildings. Our strategies, which you affect the performance on the building by design and not by adding equipment, which is generally expensive and takes a long time to recover the cost. A real breakthrough in our work happened obviously with the work in Germany. And again, we're starting out with the later buildings which we built there. And these buildings benefited from the industry in Germany, which can do much more sophisticated things than in the United States. And this also benefited from actual demands by the users for more light, for more fresh air, and it benefited from our working with Werner Sobeck and Transolar, which brought ideas to these buildings, which led us ultimately to phrase this phase in our work as Archi-neering, the close integration of architecture engineering. The formal result being just a product of how you put this building together. Aesthetic not being the primary generator, but performance of the building determining the design strategies, and grading. Then when you see it in the relationship to the other buildings, you see this is in Düsseldorf called the Sign. It's the Media Harbor, where aesthetic is created here by, again, this overlapping facade here in the other direction, which, when the sun is high, when the shading is most efficient, requires affects considerable shading of the facade, and the space in between these shingles is used for operable flaps in the floor, which bring natural air in the spaces, this office building. In this building in Bremen, which is the second building in this kind, which uses these strategies, there's exterior shades. And these exterior shades, they can make the building look, it's totally different. It's the idea of the dynamic building. It's the idea of the dynamic facade, which changes its aesthetic with mediating between the exterior requirement and the desired interior conditions. This is actually the result of doing for a while twin shell facades, which obviously are expensive, difficult to maintain, and have a lot of technology involved. And this is the result of actually grading two shells. These are stainless steel shades, which actually are only 60% solid. And when they're down, they allow a perfect transparency to the outside. The first building of this kind was done in Singen. It's a small town in the corner of Germany. And France and Switzerland. And with the big glass, we didn't want to put the windows in the glazed areas, so the windows are actually flaps in the spandrels. They also allow the air to come into the perimeter units and heat and cool these buildings. In all those buildings, the primary heating and cooling of these buildings was actually, they're all concrete buildings, integrated the heating and cooling in the slabs, which amounts for about 60% of the conditioning of the building. So there's very little air moved. There's no suspended ceilings. It's something which we found very hard to do in this bigger projects we're doing right now in China and in the Mideast, where obviously the floor sizes don't allow this simplicity of the system. This apartment building in Chicago, which uses the same principles of using a very transparent glass. In this case, it's an interior shading system. And there's a real connection between this and Las Vegas in a different way. But what is there more permanent? And in Chicago, you don't need the shades. And more than anything, it was the idea that an apartment building just should not look like an office building. It should look like a building which is open. It connects between the inside and the outside. It should have high floor-to-floor heights. It should let light in. And privacy is generally not a factor. The inside-outside relationship. Some of those things, they're, again, much harder to achieve in these multi-purpose buildings and bigger heights. The Highlight Tower in Munich, complex of 2 towers which are connected and 2 low buildings. And the picture on the left, you actually see how simple the building is. The facade, behind those vertical grills are operable windows. There's no ceiling, just suspended lights. There's a raised floor, and the integrated heating and cooling. And there's a lighting system by Jan Casalet, who's done many of our buildings, which gives this building, which is right at the intersection of the highway with the middle ring of Munich, makes it from an urbanistic point a statement for the new Munich compared to the old Munich. It's in a district called Parkstadt Schwabing, and we also won that competition and built that building on the other side. The tall towers are like bookends, creating the markers as you come in that highway, which you see on the left, the entry to the town. And that second project consists again of a mix of low and tall buildings. What these buildings do is they obviously, because there is more land, they can deal with this connection of a building and with the public space, which is obviously a problem of super tall buildings, which are obviously isolated. And I think this is something in the way. This is maybe a little bit criticism on the council, because they sometimes forget about that it's not just a tall building, but it's also the urban habitat. And I think that the tall building has to be more connected to the public space. There has to be the boundaries between in the public space obviously get much often too big, and because these buildings are expensive, the security makes them isolated, and they don't contribute. They contribute to the city on the skyline, but they don't contribute on the experience of the city at the street. Sony Center in Berlin. This was one of the first buildings finished. Had in that new technical realm, had operable windows, had glass mullions. It looked in a new way of creating a public space which connected with the tower and the low buildings. This was a project which was close to start in the Mideast and obviously Dubai, Jebel Ali. This was actually 8 buildings, 4 straight ones, 4 sloped ones, and you can say there was another building having a ring on the top. And there's a direct linkage to Sony with a shopping center, with an operable roof, which was a shade or created an enclosure for the public space in the shopping center. The roof was a tube system which created steam and produced 30% of the energy of the building. A lot of the strategies make a lot of sense in this part of the world because there's 100% sun and the light is about double the intensity than it is in our part of the world, and this was 200 by 200 meter square. The post was mentioned before. This was obviously a breakthrough building. It's again a result of something we find very little anymore in the world, because this was a very progressive corporate policy which made this building work. It was really the client, after we won the competition, to push us and to implement systems which made the building very efficient, but also very pleasant. It invented a typology of the tall tower. It's 160 meter tall. On the left, you see that double wall, which is straight on the north side, shingled on the south side, has flaps to let the air in when needed, or keeps the air out, and it takes all the air from the perimeter. And then the air gets actually exhausted in those interior sky gardens. There are 6 of them, which provide a connection between the Rhine Valley on the one side and the city on the other side. The elevators in a 40-story building were all out of glass. They were not in shafts. This building required their glass floors, required a lot of invention, new things, testing them, new materials, and I think this is a much harder thing to do in today's world, where, especially in these countries where a lot of us all work right now, that these issues are not a concern, or there may be a lip service, but there's no commitment. The Messe Tower was my return trip to Germany. Started in the early 80s, was built. By the time it was built, it was kind of the later 80s. And it's a building which you have to see for 2 things. It's the tower, which marks the massive Frankfurt. You see on the right the old exhibit hall. That's the choice for the red limestone. And all those towers in the back were not there at that time. And it was the first building which was taller than the church. Then it became the sign for the Sydney and the growing financial metropolis. And it was that model of the company, they call it also the Washington Monument. And it over the time and over all these buildings have been built, it's still, and this is not my judgment, this is what everybody tells when you get to Frankfurt, it's the defining building of the of the skyline. It was also a conscious effort to use the model of the American skyscraper and import it to Europe, but construct it in a contemporary way. And this is the time leap. This building is in Doha, and it's a mesa tower too. It's next to a convention center, which is under construction, and the tower should start construction soon. It's a campanile too. It's 550 meter tall. It's a mixed-use building. From offices to luxury apartments, a high-end hotel, and penthouse apartment, and a very special club. This building obviously required a particular structural strategy. There's only 8 columns which support the building, and the loads are transferred on these intermediate points, and the columns are tied to the core. And this is very evident in the treatment of the facades, and the facades are shingled again. There's the effort to create a certain relationship to the local tradition, to these Arabic patterns, and some of the colors you saw on the top of the building and at the base of the building. The work in Philadelphia, New York, and other United States cities started in the mid-'80s. And formerly, these buildings were more figurative. They were influenced by the tighter urban conditions. But like the Mesa Tower, they still had cladding systems which combined that new stone technologies which were at that time available with modern curtain wall construction. And they showed that when you looked at the building close. And in their figurative forms, they related, as you see on the left, with traditional buildings. And they created a specific identity for the city, because they became the new tallest point in the city. This building replaced William Penn's head on top of City Hall as the new tall feature icon sign of the city. And this meaning grows out of this absolute complexity in the city, which is such a, and I see this when I look back at these buildings now 20 years or 25 years later, compared to some of the buildings we are actually forced to build, which lack that identity, which lack that meaning, as was said before, which look very similar all over the world, and which at the end then look pretty commercial. And what is behind those buildings is that they represent the place, the character, and the spirit of their environs. This is particularly true for the New York buildings, which this is in Lexington Avenue, where you see the context of the city and the relationship to the Chrysler Building obviously led to a design which didn't compete. Park Avenue Tower. I'm told I have 2 minutes, so probably need another 2 minutes more. 750 Lexington, City Spire. And then the Chicago buildings, which were more abstract, but they also had very classic modernism, but they had formal feature which were more expressive, dynamic, and referential. This is our first tower, Xerox Center. And then we did a little side trip to South Africa, did this time in CTBUH, and did that building in Durban, which represents the idea of the spiral, which we very much is a idea which goes through much of our work. And this unbuilt project was obviously an extension. The middle building, that spire in Rosh Hashanah, was 800 meters tall and mixed use, and it combined a wind tower as a structural system with that shell which peeled away, and there was a salt water lake which produced heat, and the heat rose, and it created on those top of the building energy for a good amount for the uses and the residential uses in the building. And the spiral is a spirit of looking into the future. And this is the last project, and this is a competition in Doha, which is again, which is for a building which didn't have any use. And it's a very special place. It has nothing in it. It's a monument. It's a sign. An iconic tower, like those buildings of the past I mentioned. And the journey into this tower is a spiritual and contemplative, almost sacred experience. This is for the creative minds which start where others stop and overcome barriers through persistence, integrity, and authenticity. Imagine the future. Well, more than imagine the future, we should make the future possible. Thank you.